What if we made a TikTok/reel where your hook is, "This is how I became an official, unofficial member of Thirst." Can't believe I just made a Phonk fan cam of myself. And then you tell the story and talk about it. What's up, y'all? How's it going? Been a while since I made a video. This time I'm not freaking dying from my collapsed lung. For those of you who don't know, I had the huge opportunity to work with Thirst on their After Hours Mixtape LP. It has been just about 13 months since I was first approached to work on the album, and I believe about 10 months since the album released. I'm wanting to make this video as a summary on the entire experience working on this project, but also to give a little bit of a deeper dive into the project file and how it all came to be and some of the steps along the way that occurred to the final product that is now available on all streaming platforms. I'll try to keep this very chronological. I actually, throughout the entire process of this project, tried to save the project in as many different states so that I could see the progression looking back. And while I have, I think, like 6 or 7 versions of the project, we're gonna look at the second oldest version, the second newest version, and then the final version, because I think those have the most insight into the differences between the initial and final product. And I'll try to answer some frequently asked questions that I've gotten and insert some pieces of lore and fun facts that I can sprinkle where I can. But yeah, to give a bit of insight, Thirst is a collaborative music alias that primarily focuses on the Phonk genre, also known as drift Phonk. If you guys don't know what Phonk or drift Phonk is, it was I would say trap adjacent genre that was popularized about 2 years ago that is most noticeably discernible by the use of the cowbell instrument. It also gets the drift in drift Phonk from, I believe, its very common use and cultural influence from the drifting scene. About 13 months ago, back in April of last year, Going Quantum actually reached out and basically proposed that he had an artist with 20 songs that they're looking to release in the form of a mixtape/album. The main challenge being that they wanted the songs to all flow well, but also to sound good split up, so that they could be released as individual songs on platforms like Spotify and SoundCloud. And then he also prefaced that I would be able to get my hands on any stems and feedback to make the best mixtape possible. One of the first things that came to my mind when I was approached with this project is how similar this was to the Space Lacer's Voltage mixes. Although the Space Lacer's Voltage mixes where they differ is the fact that they are distributed as an entire mix in one go. And this was a challenge that I was very ready to agree and take up on. One of the very first things that I managed to get my hands on was a sample mix that I was given. And while I won't go too much into the mix as it was just a proof of concept, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because originally the mixtape was kind of drafted more, I think, to be stylistically actually somewhat similar, although not as intense as the Skrillex mixtape that actually dropped just about a couple months ago from this recording. I say that because in this mix, there were actually vocal samples that were thrown in throughout the mix, essentially saying things like, "This is an official Thirst mixtape. This is a Thirst exclusive."
Bisexual beats.
I want a big boy to pick me up and fuck me.
I nutted on the track.
The idea of putting in clips like this throughout the mix was pretty quickly removed, as they ended up going with more of a direction of imagining yourself in a night drive. This is the kind of mix that they wanted you to be able to immerse yourself throughout the course of 20 to 40 minutes without really consciously thinking too much about where one song starts and where one song ends. This was just supposed to be song after song after song. And I think part of that I was surprised, at least when I got the songs for the first time, was how all of these songs were, for the most part, extremely different to the entire Thirst discography prior. When I was thinking of mixtape, I was kind of expecting something a bit more like hype, workout, in the club, actual like drift Phonk, not meme music, but the kind of music that is popularized currently in the ecosystem of music. And all the music ended up being a lot more mellow, kind of vibey, go with the flow. There were a couple of moments where I kind of joked to myself that this would be the kind of music that I would that I would be listening to if I was American Psycho and you just had that like GIF playing. And it was the kind of album that didn't really feel like it was trying to go to the moon with energy. You know, it was just kind of vibes. It was just kind of vibes. That was the best way that I could describe it. So I was pretty surprised with the tracks that I was given in that regard. I was expecting a lot more of the Speed House, as I mentioned, that was already released prior. During the production of this mix, they dropped Our Stars, which is basically dubstep. After the After Hours mixtape dropped, they dropped AF1, one of my favorite songs that were dropped that year. And in the grand context of the entire Thirst discography, this entire project didn't quite mirror a lot of the previous releases that they had. But in that regard, I feel like that is why this mixtape exists. They had so many ideas and tracks that probably may not have succeeded as well, or that they weren't able to develop entirely into singles. And so for that reason, it works so incredibly in this mixtape format. And while I think a big part of the Thirst project is trying out these new ideas that are trending and are working well, is also having the playgrounds to play with new ideas. And in this case, the mixtape format that has never been done on Monstercat prior, and I don't think is really done that often in general in the music scene, aside from unofficial ID mixtapes and the Voltage mixes that I mentioned prior. And I guess a year later, the Skrillex mixtape, but I feel like this whole music topic could be its own video, so I'll skip all of that for now. One of the other things that I want to talk about quickly about Tracklist is Duality. And I want to say I'm establishing right now, the track was not named Duality after me. I've been asked that so many times. The track was named Duality before I got on. That would have been really cool to have that kind of Easter egg, but in the grand scheme of things, it was actually a coincidence. They didn't name the song after me. Duality by Thirst, however, is the first track named Duality that I've thoroughly enjoyed. So I will give Thirst credit for that. Alrighty, I have pulled up the second version of the project that I have ever had. Unfortunately, I did not save the first version, but originally when I got the first package of songs and some stems, all of the songs, or I think most of the songs, were just pre-master early versions of the tracks, so everything was very susceptible to change. And an extension of that, because a lot of the songs weren't final, I also didn't get stems for a lot of the songs. I had stems for a couple of them, but generally speaking, the mix that I was working with was entirely made out of just the full length tracks themselves. As for the direction of the mix, I was literally told that I had complete free reign to mix this however I wanted. It just had to be a good listening, seamless experience. I was also given the suggestion to start with Bloom into SKYLINE. And it turned out to be a really great 2 songs to start with, because not only were both songs in the exact same tempo and I think harmonically transitioned well, but also I feel like Bloom and SKYLINE really set the tone pretty well for how the rest of the mix was going to be. Generally speaking, when I first took on this project, I took it from the lens of just making a mix. I at first had no consideration as to where a song would start and end, and how long the transition should be. Now, unfortunately, the way FL Studio works with file pathing, if you have a lot of audio files with the same name, they end up replacing each other. So a lot of the transitions where I started to use stems are unfortunately broken. But I did want to explore some of these later transitions where you can really see how bare bones some of these transitions were, such as from Getaway into Get Free, where it's literally just the 2 songs layered on top of each other as a proof of concept, in which I would later further develop once I got my hands on stems. Here's another one from Half Bag into Dreaming. I'm going to play Kings of the Block into formerly known as Grip 2, now known as Meant to Be, because this is one of the transitions that ended up undergoing the most changes throughout the project. And a fun little nugget is that originally the mix was supposed to end on, formerly known as Dream 2, now known as simply Dream, from TIMEOUT.
We can both cross paths one day, reach for the papers and the place go up in flames.
I sent that as a version 1 to Thirst and Going Quantum, and I've got some very valuable feedback. One of the things that I very quickly was kind of realizing, at least from this mix first approach, is that because we were trying to go for a make your cake and have it too scenario, transitions had to be very particular. And what that meant is when you're making a mix, the goal is obviously to take you from one song to another. And part of it is obviously the transition. And I think when you're DJing or making mixes, some of these transitions can be very drawn out and obvious. And that could be part of the entertainment aspect of it. But in the case where the songs need to be also good as singles, one of the things that I came to realize is you had to kind of approach every transition with one of two objectives. The first one is the transition had to be either instantaneous, where the song would be cut, or the transition had to be, from a production standpoint, essentially seamless. The two songs had to have not been two songs at all. It was just one song. What I kind of meant by that is when you listen to a mix, there are sometimes parts of a mix where it's very obvious where one song starts and one song ends. And with the eventual access to these stems, part of the goal is to blur the lines in that regard. There are a couple transitions where I had stems from one song being used in the exit of another song, and then peppering some of the previous song stems into the future song, so that basically on a first listen, if you didn't have the track list, you weren't supposed to know when that song starts or ends. From a technical aspect, that is kind of impossible because streaming services do not support the mixtape format in this regard. You get like a couple milliseconds of silence between each song. But in a perfect world, or if you listen to the mixtape on YouTube where it is just one upload, for the transitions that were longer or drawn out, the goal was for it to not sound like a transition at all, just that the song continued and it was just different. Around the time after I had delivered the first version of the mixtape was also when I had thought of the idea of not just having this mixtape be a continuous listening experience, but that the continuous listening experience could be listened to infinitely. If you listen to it on loop, the entire mixtape loops back into itself. And I think part of my motivation for really pushing for this was continuous listening experiences already exist. It's not new. The mixtape format, it was pretty new from a music marketing and streaming service oriented perspective, but I kind of wanted to try leaving something a bit more innovative than just a mixtape. And having an album that loops back into itself is something that, as far as I'm aware, has not been done before. I imagine it's probably didn't been done before. I don't think it's necessarily that groundbreaking of an idea. And originally, when I had pitched it to them, they were all pretty on board with it. And it was after version 1 where, because of that, I not only had to think about how all the songs transitioned into each other, but also how the last song would then transition back into the first one. Dream 2 was also a pretty difficult song to end on. I think if anybody was listening to the mixtape and this is how the mixtape ended, it's not a very enjoyable way to end, I think, a song, but also just the mixtape in general. I think I had like 4 or 5 versions of this album that I've exported, and so because of that, I have like 130 tracks on my SoundCloud in private that are just from Thirst over and over again. But I do have here mixtape V1, which is what I sent them, and you guys can kind of get an idea for how the songs cut into each other. Basically, at the time, because I was more focused on it being a mix experience than a singular experience, I basically just took all the transitions and just cut it right down the middle. I knew that not all the transitions were going to be like that, but what we established pretty early on is that the goal was to also split the songs into singles, and every single song started fading in from a previous song. It is not necessarily a good experience for the listener. Now, the question y'all are probably thinking is, well, if it's a seamless album listening experience, why does that matter? Why don't they just start at the beginning of the album? True, they should listen to the beginning of the album. The fact of the matter is, these streaming sites are going to be advertising these songs in their algorithms on a single basis, all right? It's unlikely that a person that's never listened to Thirst is going to get Bloom as their first track. And even if they did get Bloom as their first track, because the algorithm recommends individual songs, they might not even get the second track, or they might get other Thirst tracks that are out of order. The point is, if they're only going to listen to one track off of that album, every single track has to start off strong, has to start off good, has to start off clean, which is why every transition essentially needs to be completed before the next song starts. For the most part, there are a couple songs where that is not the case, but generally speaking, if you were to listen back to the mixtape album and its singles, every single song starts as if it is its own song. Well, I'm not going to listen to every single version. I did want to show y'all some of the funny album covers that I had sent just because I thought they were funny. Rule number 1, always boss up. Always. This here is a robotic waiter or dish carrier that I took a photo of while I was at Denny's around that time last year, making me realize I would really like some Denny's right now. This is a Pokemon substitute plush wearing a Monstercat hoodie. This was my profile picture for a bit because that's obviously me. Here I ran out of photos. I just needed something very quickly. This is just a cat looking at a sunset. Once again, I had no images. I took the album cover for Simulcat's Composure VIP. Stream it. Unfortunately, Going Quantum or Thirst never commented on the album covers. Sometimes you got a hard crowd, you know what I'm saying? Over time, I've exchanged a couple more work in progresses and drafts. Some of the big changes, aside from improving on the transitions, was Dream was no longer the ending track, and at one point I did have Timeout as the final track of the project before looping back into Bloom. And I actually kind of like this this transition. I'll see if I can find it.
Reach for the papers and the place go up in flames.
Something else that also changed is that originally Bloom was the first track of the mix. Eventually it got swapped with SKYLINE being the first track and then transitioning into Bloom later on. But one of the transitions I kind of didn't touch throughout this entire time was with Meant to Be. Around middle of May, I would say we entered the nuphory arc of this mix. For those of you who are familiar with the Thirst album, 19 out of the 20 tracks are exclusively produced by Thirst. And so generally speaking, whenever I needed like a stem or I needed to exchange feedback with them or they needed to send me a master, this was all just done between myself, Thirst, and Going Quantum. At the time, the only thing I had from Meant to Be was the work in progress, and so I didn't really work on that transition all that much until this period of time. And that was for two reasons. I had kind of sandwiched it between very difficult tracks to transition into and out of. That's just the nature of the mix game. So you're not always going to have a good roll of the dice with the track order. But the other one was because nuphory was an artist on this track as well, we also had to coordinate with nuphory on any stems and updated versions of the tracks. Our correspondence begun with nuphory asking me if I was Duality from SoundCloud, and I just thought it was pretty funny because it reminds me of the memes where people ask, you know, is that Jonesy from Fortnite? And if that is my lasting legacy as Duality from SoundCloud, I'll take it. Jokes aside, nuphory was a huge pleasure to chat and work with. Not only were they, you know, on top of everything and sending over stuff and giving feedback, they also, on a personal level, gave me some pretty insightful tips and stuff with working in the music scene and, you know, doing commission work and whatnot. So thank you, nuphory. But with all of that aside, there was a little hiccup that occurred along the road, which is that originally all 20 songs were supposed to drop on the same day. And that would have been, I think, a very interesting case study in regards to how that project would have succeeded, dropping 20 songs on the same day with no singles prior to. As you guys know, with the power of foresight, is that Meant to Be ended up getting a single release prior to the full album being dropped. If my memory serves me correct, there was an opening in the schedule for one reason or another, and they decided to take Meant to Be and to release it as a standalone track before the album. Now, they still kept up with the surprise of the mixtape because they dropped the album and there were a couple people that did notice that there was a transition into the track when it started. But beyond that, it was, as far as anyone was officially aware, just a single, and that was all it was. Because of this change in plans, the amount of time from this revelation to the song's master being submitted and distributed to it being released was in the span of I think 1.5 weeks. It was very quick turnaround. Now, you guys probably watching are thinking to yourselves, well, why does that matter? What does that have to do anything to do with you? I have done no work on the track transitioning in and out. And so because of that, once the song is distributed, that is the song I have to work with. Basically, you guys have probably played those puzzles, right? Where maybe you have to move things around on a checkered board, but some of the pieces are frozen. That's basically what I had to deal with Meant to Be. Originally, when I was discussing with nuphory and the Thirst lads, they were going to produce a version of the track with I think an 8-bar reverse reverb into the song, and that would have been perfect. In this older version, what I had originally envisioned for the transition from Dream into Meant to Be was that Dream would finish and that Meant to Be would immediately start. But obviously the two songs are very different in tempo, so that the tempo would actually ramp up in Meant to Be and then reach its peak tempo right at the drop. I thought that would build up anticipation, it would be very exciting, and then be very hype once the song dropped. Now, it sounds pretty rough. The goal was to eventually get stems to flesh out that transition. And my vision was for the song to start exactly here, with probably some reverb and impact effects from the previous track. As y'all are familiar with, the song starts right here. The music critique in me says, that's kind of a weird way to start a song. In the grand scheme of things, not the end of the world. But I think in a perfect world, the song would have started here. Also, as is evident, the track now has vocals. The long story short in this whole saga is that the reverse reverb wasn't actually compatible with the final master because the reverse reverb wasn't mastered in the mastering chain, which is why in the final version, Going Quantum had suggested this idea of adding in these glitch effects to kind of smooth out the transition, for a lack of better words. If I remove these glitch effects, you guys will be able to hear the problem. Due to the time crunch, the only way to mask this transition was to have these glitch effects. Cinema, masterpiece. No one can tell that there was a cut there. Saved. Aside from these glitch transitions, one of the last pieces of feedback that I was given from the Thirst lads was, hey, the song's kind of loud. Can you just turn it down a couple decibels in your mix? And my answer was no, because the song's already distributed. It's in a perfect world where we had more time, unfortunately, the songs right after are just quieter. Meant to Be is admittedly a little loud, but I guess that's, you'll live, you'll learn. Can't really do much about it. At this point in the project, y'all can also see where I started marking where every single song was cut. By the later versions of this project, one of the final pieces of feedback, aside from a couple mixing things here and there, was essentially taking a number of the transitions and essentially cutting them in half. As I mentioned earlier on, for a format in this style, the best way to approach them is either do the transitions instantly or to make them as seamless as possible, but also quickly. Now, excuse my lack of music terminology, I think this is a measure, right? I'm sorry if it's not. Normally, when I'm doing a mix, I either make my transitions in 4 measures, 8 measures, or 16 measures, or I just do a drop switch. Never in measures of 2, which is something that we've got going on over here. As you can see, the end of the song has 1 measure and the beginning of this song has the 2nd measure, which was already also a bit of an adaptation that I had to kind of get used to. It was just like, oh, none of the songs will have a proper outro, and some of the songs will not have a proper intro. You can kind of see, and I've got over here as well, Bloom into Stay Close. The ending is 1 measure, but the intro is 2 measures. Generally, if I could, I will try to have every intro be about 2 measures. But the outro was kind of just wild territory at that point. Will it have 1 measure? Will it have 0 measures? Who knows? Stay Close is a great example of a track that just ends. The transition is just instantaneous. I think that's a good example of just a transition that is instant. It had to happen right there. There was no way to do a drawn out transition while also keeping it seamless. Versus, as I showed earlier, the transition between SKYLINE and Bloom, with the tracks being so similar, we were able to just kind of share the stems between them and create a seamless listening experience. They sound like the same song. Here I've got AURORA into Reflection. The transition is completed before the song starts, and I guess the song just kind of starts instantly at Reflection. Here we have 1.5 measures going on from Reflection into Feel It. The transition from Feel It into Trapped Memory, I think, is one of the best examples of a drawn-out transition that is probably the closest to a mix style. We have a 2-measure outro and a 2-measure intro. So both songs had, I think, some level of a proper structure to it. Without being too repetitive, Trapped Memory into Duality is basically the same thing in that regard. It was drawn out, but partially because I was going from a song with a kick drum outro into a song with just a plain, vinyl crackle and minor instrumental intro. I actually really liked the transition from Duality into Full Speed. I guess some lore is Duality originally had vocals, and I had this transition that I really liked where the Duality vocals played in the Full Speed intro, but because the vocals got scrapped, it ended up just being very clean and just another example of just a transition that just happens on the spot. Gosh, I want to play this on loudspeakers. Full Speed into Getaway, same thing. It had to happen instantly. Full Speed did not have an outro, and basically just had to roll with it. To go on a quick tangent, when I first got all the songs, I actually wrote a ton of notes of all the songs and the main aspects that were worth noting. As you guys can see, a lot of these songs had 2 drops. A couple other things worth noting is, contrary against popular belief, Getaway had the tempos burnt into the song that way. I did not step up the tempo like that, but I thought that was a pretty interesting artistic choice, and it did allow me to increase the tempo of the mixtape without having to artificially speed things up. Another thing that I had noticed was some of the songs had reoccurring vocalists, formerly known as Roll It Up with PVC, now just being Roll It Up, having the same vocalist as Timeout. Originally, the 2 songs, I was hoping to have them like back to back, because it kind of would have been like, ooh, this vocalist is still dropping bars, they're not done yet. But in this way, where Roll It Up is in the middle of the mix and Timeout ends the mix, I feel like it's a really nice kind of come back full circle moment. Oh, encore. That's the word I was looking for. I feel like it's a good encore moment where the artist comes back and wraps things up. But to go back to the obvious, not only did a lot of the songs have 2 drops, a lot of the songs had longer intros and longer outros. And part of the artistic vision was to cut some of these songs in half, quite literally. Now, for those of you worrying about lost media, lost content, the second drops that we cut generally was just a copy paste of the first one, so you guys aren't missing out on any, lost thirst media. I do think it opens the door in the future potentially for actual extended mixes. Not all, some songs quite literally, as I've noted in my spreadsheet. Half Bag did not have an outro, they just faded out. And I was like, you're kidding me. Where is Half Bag? How did I transition out of it? Oh, here's how I transitioned out of it. This is how Half Bag ends. That's half of a transition. Now I just need the song to fade into. Anyways, for those of you curious why I essentially just dropped the end of Half Bag, that is why. I highlighted the Getaway into Get Free transition earlier as an example of a transition that I greatly improved upon, but this is one of my favorite transitions in this whole mix. Partially because I think I did an incredible job of mending the 2 songs together, but also because I reused I guess I did a call-in effect and reused some of this samples or motifs, you could say, between the 2 songs. But yeah, obviously in this project, you can clearly see where the song starts and ends. But if you were listening to the mix and you had no idea what was coming up next, I think this is a perfect transition. Like, you didn't know, well, okay, this one maybe you kind of knew where the song ended. It would have been right here. But that was also kind of like the, ooh, what happened? Something happened. Whoa, whoa. And then melody change, woo! Get Free into Roll It Up was, again, one of those tracks where I just kind of didn't know how to end it. It does have an outro, but the outro just did not quite work because of the mood change. Get Free is kind of more hype, whereas Roll It Up is like more of like, I don't want to say stoner vibes, but like, it's nighttime, you're thinking to yourself, you're trying to be a cool boy.
So Peter Piper picked a pack of purple peppers, rolled it up and found a lighter, took him somewhere better, yeah.
Wait, what?
Rolled it up and found a lighter, took him.
Roll it up, find a lighter. Oh, literally smoker vibes. Okay, fair enough. But using the backspin to kind of definitively distinguish, like, okay, here's the song stops here. All right, we got to get to the next song. Just instantaneous transition. In quite a literal sense, too. I think this one and then the transition into Meant to Be are the only transitions that kind of, I don't know if this is the best definition or description of it, but break the fourth wall, where we're not trying to hide that there's a transition. We're actually making it very obvious that it's a transition. There's quite literally a backspin there. There is a transition right there. But it served its purpose in making the transition instantaneous, progressing the mix.
Gave me the elements that I could let it rain, set the blaze, and then we took it all away, like.
The transition from Half Bag into Dreaming was one that I I suffered pretty greatly. This was one that I meticulously worked on for a lot longer than I think I would have liked to. But it was very difficult because there were two songs that were very different in energy, very different in tone. And as I mentioned, Halfback doesn't have an outro. So I think this is kind of one of those, like, it's obvious that this is a transition. I think this transition is pretty unique in that it doesn't fit into the criteria of the transition being instant nor seamless. The moment the song changes is instant, but the transition still continues afterwards. And it's very obvious that it's transitioning. And I guess for a third point, it doesn't have that fourth wall break effect where it has the backspin or the glitch effect.
I keep believing.
That is how Dreaming starts, by the way. There is no intro. That is also a common theme, as I mentioned. I did have to cut intros and outros and drops, but sometimes I just had to make new intros and new outros, which was a very viable option using stems that were given to me. But in that regard, I had a lot more creativity with the mixtape than I originally thought that I was going to have, because yes, I was being given the finished products, but I also kind of got to reimagine some of the songs in my own way because of the fact that I had to essentially fill in these gaps. I think the best way that I can put it is one of the types of book genres that I enjoyed reading as a child were anthologies, which is basically just a bunch of short stories that are from a similar topic or plot, but all of them are completely separate plot lines. They don't interact in any sort of way. This album kind of feels that way, where you have 20 songs that have all a similar direction or inspiration, but they're all different universes. And it was my job to find the plot line, to find the cohesion, to find the journey. Dreaming into Yellow Tree was a transition that I was pretty happy that I found. I like this one as well. Yellow Tree was kind of where we got to the point where I was just like, okay, this is where the fun begins. Anyone who has made a mix with obligatory tracks or a determined track list knows the experience of getting to the last 20% of your mix and being like, okay, I haven't used these songs yet. Where are they going to fit? And this mixtape is no exception. I think people who might listen to it might kind of realize the entire journey up to this point has had some level of cohesion. And over here, some people think, well, it's kind of a little bit exciting. Part of it being, for example, with Yellow Tree into Kings of the Block, the transition's a little longer, but also the tempo changes get a lot more drastic here. We're not really doing tiny 1, 2 BPM, 10 BPM adjustments. To this day, I'm still not 100% sure if I should have kept this vocal right over here. But otherwise, I thought this was a pretty interesting transition. I think it kind of set you up to be like, oh, wait, this guy's speaking now. What's going on over here? And then it happens again right before the drop, and you're like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's gaming time. It's gaming time. Dream, I'm going to be honest. All right? Thirst, don't hurt me. Dream might be my least favorite track on this album. Partially because, all right, no outro. All right, you guys heard me. Listen, when in doubt, reverb into reverse reverb, classic transition. Can't go wrong with it. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now, let's talk about Dream into Meant to Be. So, As I mentioned, originally my plan was, because the previous song was 120 BPM and I had to go into a 155 BPM track, I wanted to increase the tempo at the beginning of Meant to Be, and then at the peak of the song, at the drop, was when the song would reach its peak tempo. Because of the nature of how we had to distribute Meant to Be before every other song, this was the final master that I had to work with. Few things to note is, as you can see here, I had this little tiny bit of reverse reverb. This was non-negotiable. I had to transition into that. Another thing that's worth noting is at the end of Meant to Be, the song just cuts right here. Fortunately, the full stems had additional reverb at the end that I was able to line up and extrapolate from. As you can see, there's some additional elements. I guess the synths extra and bass had nothing, so that did not need to be there. But to go back, as y'all can see, because I was no longer able to touch Meant to Be, this was a Monstercat exclusive track, could not be touched. If I touched this song, I am getting obliterated. There was nothing that could be done. So that meant instead of working with Meant to Be, I had to interpolate with Dream. And as I mentioned, Dream doesn't have an outro, so I made one. I'm pretty happy with how that all came out. Using the vocals to kind of tease into the next part, being able to make an outro out of literally nothing. Well, mostly the intro elements reused over again. I don't know what to say. This is like when you're traveling through a wormhole. I don't know. This is uncharted thirst territory. This is the only part of the mix where people could rightfully be like, what is going on here? But then we make it through that wormhole and we're back into the mix. And more hype and excited than ever. It's loud, it's hype, we ballin'. Let's talk about the transition out. So pretty simple. I needed to get out of Meant to Be as fast as possible and start fading into the next track. I think if I recall correctly, Never Leave You doesn't have an intro either. Does not. I had to make this. Very simple though. If I recall correctly, originally I had a bit more overlap in this transition, but as I mentioned, they ended up deciding to not have any overlap at the end of the transition. They wanted the song to end the way it did, which is just fade out. Just like that. That's how the song ends. So I had to kind of shift the entire mix forward a little bit, and then I had this intro, which I think worked out pretty well in the grand scheme of things. Never Leave You into Timeout, I think, is the second only other kind of drastic tempo change where you could definitively tell like things are changing. And in the only way I could really describe this is I feel like Never Leave You has like this bittersweet feeling, maybe. I don't know if that's the best word, where it's like it's hype, but it's happy. But it's happy in the sense of like it shouldn't feel happy. I don't know. Maybe this is just me speaking. Like this is how I'm kind of interpreting the vibes of the song. You're thinking back to prior days when you were in your prime. And then Timeout comes in and it's very dark, very gloomy. The vocalist comes back. It's a very, very big change in tone.
Look, I never smoked something so loud.
I do like that transition. I think this is also a bit of an unconventional one where it's like 1.5 measures for the outro and then half a measure for this one. Although the song is another example of a song that just does not have an intro. That was the full intro.
Look, I never.
That was the original song intro. So at the end, we've got My Pride and Joy, the loop back to SKYLINE. This was something that I had to push quite hard to keep because there were a couple points in the development of this mixtape where they wanted to remove it. Not this transition specifically. This transition was originally into like a different song, and that wasn't quite good, admittedly. The transition was longer. So I had to tweak this transition quite a bit. Personally, from a personal standpoint, I wish the transition was more obvious, because I feel like most people that listen to this didn't realize that it looped back around. But I think the people who did find out that the whole album looped, before they even knew that I had worked on it, like spoke highly of that as like a really cool aspect to the album. And so I do want to give a shout out to those of you who noticed that the album looped and that they liked it. This is probably like the one artistic influence that I had. I mean, obviously aside from all the transitions, but like this is something that I really pushed for, and I'm glad that made it into the project. If I had to be credited for anything, I want to be this. I'm very proud of this whole album looping.
We can both cross paths one day. Reach for the papers and the place go up in flames.
I just paused the recording just to make sure I didn't lose the footage, and I just noticed the thirst animation behind me stopped playing. I don't know how long it's been like that. Man, I've been talking for like 2 hours. I hope whatever was behind me was cool or something. Holy cow. Alright, we got our thirst back. Anyways, let's try to wrap this up. So, project was finished. They were happy with it. How did I finish? There are two aspects to this. Number one, as y'all saw, I had marked exactly where I wanted every track to start and end. What I did was I took the previous project, this one, in its entirety, including the bloom, including the reuse of SKYLINE at the end. I exported the entire thing and then imported it into a brand new project. What I then did is I went in and I made every single cut individually down to as small of a measurement that I could. What I also then did is at the very end, I did the cut and lined it up to make sure that it looped correctly. What I did afterwards is I went to every single cut, and I don't know if you can see it, it's very difficult, but I added tiny fades. I'm going to probably have to zoom in. Added tiny fades at the end and the beginning of every single cut with the goal of having no audio clicks. And I then listened to all of it again, and I heard no audio clicks. So I'm happy. It all worked. Then I went in and I selected every single portion of the song and exported it. I then had to export a second version of every single track. And the reason is because of SoundCloud. This is something I've always known, but I never knew the specifics of until I had to for this project. But as y'all know, SoundCloud has this very weird bug where basically, if you listen to a song on SoundCloud for any reason, the beginning of the song just gets cut off. There's no reason why it should. I don't know why it exists. And I don't know why SoundCloud hasn't fixed it. But that is the case, and that is the landscape. I exported these couple samples to test how much of the beginning of a song do they cut it. Had to refresh it. It's not very consistent, and it's possible that since last year to now, maybe they fixed it or improved it. But the point is, if you're trying to have a seamless mix experience, but SoundCloud is eating the first eighth or first quarter of a second of your song, it's going to ruin the mix, on top of the buffering between loading every song between each song. So what I had to do is I created a second version of the tracks that all had about 200 milliseconds of silence right at the beginning, all 20 tracks. I ran out of space on Dropbox, which is why I had to upload the SoundCloud version on Google Drive and the universal actual masters on Dropbox. I also uploaded the full exported mix with silence on Google Drive and without silence on Dropbox. Anyways, SoundCloud, I hate you. I also love you. I hate Spotify even more. Please fix that bug. And at that point, the mix was done, shipped, and ready to be cool, ready to be awesome, ready to be epic. One of the last things that I will answer in this whole video is I had a couple of people ask me about compensation, but also crediting. part of the agreement behind this whole project was that I would not be given any writer's credits in this. And there were 2 points to this which I completely understood and agreed to, which is that number one, because this was a Thirst album, they didn't want potentially my name on the project to distract from that. I think they were overestimating my significance and pull nowadays. I don't think I have that big of a following that Duality being on the project as an uncredited writer would, bring waves to the scene. But I understood the concern, which is also why I was asked to not discuss my involvement in the album for about a month after it released. There was no contract. There was no official NDA. There was a silly one that Going Quantum gave me, but generally speaking, like, it wasn't anything that I was, too worried about. And the second one, at least from my own introspection, is that I think if people saw my name under all 20 tracks, there would be an incorrect assumption that I was involved in the production of the music, which is not the case. I had no involvement in the production of the music, but I was given the music and was involved in stitching all the songs together. I think there's probably a conversation to be had that if I was to be credited, I would be credited as a person on the body of work as a whole and not the individual music. Besides all of that, I agreed to not be credited, and I am completely happy and once again very honored that I was able to partake in this project. I was financially compensated for my time and will be able to use this in my portfolio as a piece of work and a body of art that I have involved myself and my effort and my time in. In the future, if Thirst ever decides to do an After Hours Part 2 or Before Hours and they're happy to have me on, I'd love to work on it, I guess, even earlier in the process, and maybe I could actually have some involvement in that regard. If that opportunity never arises, I'm just extremely happy to have been a part of the entire experience. I've learned so much more as not just a mixer, but also production and composition, and also some of the inner workings in working in the music scene, even if it's something as doing contract work. The Thirst lads were very pleasant to work with, and on a more broad scale, I'm extremely happy with the reception that the album has been received with. I think a lot of the comments that I saw on the album really opened my eyes into how this project succeeded. Particularly, I noticed that a lot of people were saying, like, this isn't the kind of music I would listen to. And if the songs were standalone singles, it probably would not have succeeded as well as the way it succeeds as a body of art as a whole, which I think was very insightful. And at least as a person involved in it, really made me feel pretty proud of the work that I had, that people liked it, not just for the music that was on it, but for the experience as a whole that I was able to deliver. And as somebody myself who doesn't really produce much at all, this is probably the closest I'll ever get to getting an official Monstercat release. So once again, want to give a huge shout out to Going Quantum for having me on the project, the Thirst lads and nuphory for being such pleasant peers to work with. And yeah, I don't really think I have much else to add on, but I hope this was insightful into the whole project, to my line of thinking, to the behind the scenes that I was to give. I tried to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions that I saw, but if y'all have any questions that I didn't answer or that I can maybe answer, feel free to leave a comment in the section down below or join my Discord and I can perhaps answer there as well. Anyways, that's all for me. What is being advertised behind me? What's going on here? Look at those interpolated frames. They had to slow down that clip because they probably didn't have enough clip and now it's sped back up. Listen, hire me. Anyways, we skipping that. We skipping that. We don't want to watch that. I reckon having ads in the middle of the mix might ruin the experience. So, my bad. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. See you around whenever. Bye-bye.